Greetings, folks. How's everybody this evening? Excellent, excellent. What I'd like to do first is take a test of audience demography, if I may. And my question for you is this. How many people in here have an instrument rating or better? Anybody in here? Instrument rating or better? Okay, very good. And how many people in here have just soloed? Is anybody just soloed? Anybody here? Okay. Now, does the instructor know of that solo? I'm curious about that. Some people, of course, go the extra mile to motivate their instructor. They solo themselves, which is a rather unusual thing. I'm curious, folks, how many people have ever heard or seen me speak before? How many people have ever, well, there goes that material. Okay. Who has never heard or seen me speak before? Okay, excellent. And just out of curiosity, who doesn't want to hear me speak right now? Excellent. Folks, I'd like to ask you this question to start off with this evening. How many of you folks in here are familiar with the fine art of magic performed correctly? Good. That's going to make this trick go over real well. Stand by real quick here. Have I got a magic trick for you? Now, folks, I want you to watch very carefully. And when I say those magic words I learned in church, bingo, all of a sudden, whoa. Now, some of you are looking and going, that guy is good. Just look at that. That is just incredible. Look at that. 100 years ago, you'd have made me chief of the tribe for doing this trick. And now I can't even get one simple round of applause. Not even a little, oh, that's okay. Oh, darn. Actually, you know what? I did this for a group of Iraqi diplomats about 3 years ago, and I lowered the napkin, and they still couldn't get it. So, have to go back there someday and try it again. There's a very important moral to this story, folks, and that is this, that when you know what the magician knows, it's not magic anymore. And that was said by Donald Shimoda in Richard Bach's book, Illusions. And similarly, when we know how people think who have what I call the safety reflex, who have that attitude that allows them to have that extra survival potential in an aircraft, then it's not magic anymore. And tonight, what I'm going to talk about is that particular safety reflex and talk to you about how to get it based on the studies that I have done over the years with what we call cockpit psychology. And I find this most intriguing. I must tell you, already, based on talking to George and having an opportunity to share conversation with some of you in the back, I already know I'm preaching to the choir in this group. Nevertheless, this is something that we can talk about and I think still share and learn a great deal about, and that's the intent of the program tonight. And if you are as excited about aviation as I am, we will have a great time tonight because I do not believe in having any type of presentation where you don't have fun. I've been to so many presentations before where you're sitting in the audience and you look around and you look at everybody and nobody's having any fun. It kind of looks like what the family living room looks like after Thanksgiving dinner. Everybody's laying around, sort of spread eagle on the couch. It's as if Mom stuffed the turkey with Thorazine, if you understand what I'm saying. So allow me to have fun with you tonight. I'm the kind of guy that still gets excited by a 172 flyby. So aviation, some of you are going, I don't believe it. Honest to goodness, a 172 flyby. Strangely enough, I do. Folks, what is this unique quality that some people have talked about that has been coined the right stuff, the survival reflex, as I call it? What is this unique quality that allows people, certain people, to have a highly developed survival edge in the aircraft? To me, it's most fascinating to consider and to think about. And based on my research, I think I've come up with the idea. Folks, what I've noticed over the years is that people that fly aircraft that have this survival quality, this thing that the Chuck Yeagers and the Scott Crossfields of the world have had, seems to be an inordinate predisposition as a pilot when they fly to think defensively. In other words, they're always thinking defensively in an aircraft all the time. In terms of thinking defensively, it's not just going up in an aircraft and thinking in terms of, well, if a problem happens, I will handle it when it occurs. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the kind of defensive thinking where people think about handling the problem even before they get in the aircraft. And this is the thing that I think made up the mentality of Chuck Yeager and the people like Scott Crossfield, Neil Armstrongs, and many people of that particular ilk. Very important thing to consider. And again, we've called it the right stuff, but I call it the survival reflex for a very, very important reason. Folks, what we know from people that fly aircraft that do this and have this survival quality is that they have an inordinate predisposition to sense their own vulnerability. They know when they are very vulnerable. These are the kind of people that go the extra mile to protect this vulnerability. And Chuck Yeager, by the way, said in his book, The Autobiography of Chuck Yeager, an excellent book to read. And by the way, let me ask you a question. How many people in here have ever read Chuck Yeager's autobiography? Anybody ever read that? Okay. Wow, that's interesting. How many people have never read Chuck Yeager's autobiography? No, don't be ashamed. Raise your hand. Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed. Stick your hand up high. Don't be ashamed. Let me take a count. Get it up high. Good. Well, you should be ashamed of yourself, each and every one of you. How many people never raise their hand again? Okay. The thing I find most interesting is Chuck Yeager said this in his autobiography, a very good book to read. He said, "I was always afraid of dying in an airplane. I was always afraid of dying in an airplane." And it's my belief that that particular attitude, that mentality, is what allowed him to have such a very refined survival edge, a honed survival edge that kept him safe in a series of trials and tests that tested his survivability on every flight. Absolutely amazing. Now, the survival reflex I'm talking about is the kind of reflex where it's possessed by the guy who walks out to the airplane during pre-flight and he looks at the airplane. He looks at it from a distance even before he gets in the aircraft. I mean, he just looks at it to see if one wing has more dihedral than the other wing. Perhaps a student pilot flew it on the previous flight and added that extra dihedral to that left wing. That's possible. But he looks at the aircraft and he checks for oil leaks, and of course he expects not to see oil leaks unless, of course, it's an Apache, in which case that's common to see those things in an Apache. But he looks around the aircraft, and then he gets close to the aircraft and he takes out his fuel sampler and he checks the fuel, but because of this survival edge, he checks the fuel. He takes his sunglasses off before he actually looks at the fuel in the sampler. Now, there's a reason for that, because some people, when you dip the fuel sampler in there, you look out and you get strangely colored fuel, like orange fuel. And the reason you get that is because you have orange sunglasses on. But people are predisposed to think this way. They look at the problems and protect themselves that way. They look at the wheels of the aircraft and they check the nose strut to see if it's overextended or underextended based on its normal extension. And from that, as well as sensing how compressed the tires are, people are actually able to sense the center of gravity location on the aircraft just visually, like they used to do on the DC-3s. They used to check and see whether the tires were compressed or not compressed enough, or the military C-45. These people, when they get in the aircraft and they taxi, they can actually sense how well the aircraft handles during taxi to see if indeed they perhaps have a center of gravity problem, even, of course, after they've done a CG analysis on the aircraft. When they're going down the runway, they'll actually put their hand into their actual earphone right here and cup the headphone back so they can actually listen to what the engines sound like during the acceleration down the runway. And they're listening for engine problems. These are the kind of people that look at the fuel gauge and the oil pressure gauge, and if they see the oil pressure going down, they'll shorten the flight. And if they see the Hobbs meter actually stop working, they'll lengthen the flight, if you understand what I'm saying. These are the kind of people that have what I call the survival reflex. And that is something that some people are actually writing that down. Okay. Rod Machado says if Hobbs meter actually stops, it's okay to lengthen the flight. Okay, that's sort of an unwritten rule, but these are the kind of people that have that survival reflex. Let's talk about the rules for getting that survival reflex. It's a way of thinking in the aircraft, and folks, that's what I want to do tonight. I want to alter your perspective, and I know I can do it because I'm going to give you 6 rules, and at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you or let you listen to a tape that was an actual in-flight emergency recording tape of 2 gentlemen in an MU-2, with a wing full of ice, applying the rules that kept them safe, that allowed them to apply this defense reflex, this survival reflex. This will knock your wheel pants off. It's an absolutely amazing thing to listen to. But first, try this. Most of us in an aircraft do not use what we call modern-day psychology to fly an aircraft. And I'm as guilty of this as perhaps some of you are. In an aircraft, you and I have both been inclined to use what is known as 2,000-year-old psychology. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by 2,000-year-old psychology. In an aircraft, we know the common sense things to do in this case, but sometimes we actually find ourselves hoping when we are in the throes of an emergency, like icing conditions, we end up hoping. We end up doing what the voodoo witch doctor priests of many years ago used to do on the island of Bali. They would hope somebody would get sick. They would hope somebody would get in trouble. Folks, in essence, when we hope in an aircraft, we are doing nothing more than praying. Now think about this. You'll never find an owner's manual on this planet by any manufacturer ever made that says if pilot is in icing condition, he should hope to get out. You'll never find that. You won't, but we do that sometimes. Let me ask you this question. I want you to respond to me as truthfully as you can. Have you ever been flying along and all of a sudden had that engine start to sputter up in front? And all of a sudden it starts to sputter again and sputter a little bit more, and you start thinking, that doesn't sound right. So you check, and you've been doing a real good job of navigation. You're a little confused because you've been navigating to the Poughkeepsie VOR on the amp meter. But not a bad deal using that because it's pretty easy to keep that thing centered. And all of a sudden, the engine starts to get a little rough again, and all of a sudden, your electrical equipment fails, which is not too bad because the thunderstorms outside light up the cabin as you're flying along. And all of a sudden, you got a lot of smoke and everything else like that, which is pretty unusual because, you paid $39 for this transponder and nav package, and you got it out behind the shopping center at night with the serial numbers crossed out on the side. Well, that's no reason not to expect it to quit working right about now. And all of a sudden, you realize that your passengers in the back of the aircraft are a little confused about what's going on. They don't feel too comfortable with you flying this aircraft. One of them has reached into his flight case, pulled out a little Jesus statue, put it on the top of the dash for you, pulled out 12 candles, starts lighting those things, and one guy in the back's twirling his Pope soap and robe. And you look, and all of a sudden, your engine quits, just quits, graveyard dead. And folks, all of a sudden, have you ever found yourself saying this? Oh, man, I hope it starts again. Oh, if I could only get down. How many people have ever said that before? Now, be truthful to me. How many people have ever said, oh, if I could only get down? I'll raise my hand to that because I have, and I suspect you have. Folks, that is called praying. And if you're going to pray, my advice to you is this. If you're going to pray in an aircraft, and that's all you're going to do, and not that there's anything wrong with that, do me a favor. Pray into the microphone. I mean, just hold it in the direction your mouth is pointed, in between your mouth and the direction the prayer is going. And when you key the microphone and you go, I hope I get down, click and let go of the button, I guarantee your prayers will be answered. Because somebody's going to come up and say, Roger, 32 Bravo, come on down. And I would suggest what you do is pray on Spiritual Hotline 121.5. Guaranteed to get a response there. And folks, many of us are flying along, and we're out there talking, we're going, hello Allah, come in Buddha, speak to me, Krishna. And folks, what we do is this. Sometimes that's our strategy for dealing with problems in an aircraft, we hope. And I will tell you that the use of language, this power that we apply in the symbols we use, such as the words, if I say the word, it will help me get down. That is tantamount to 2,000-year-old psychology, not a very wise way to fly an aircraft. Again, remember, words, the use of words are very important because they allow us to be different from other animals. In fact, I always tell people, as a linguistic instructor told me in psychology school, that words allow us to remain dominant over the other animal species on the planet. Of course, my grandfather always said that the thing that distinguishes us from other animals is the fact that we are not afraid of vacuum cleaners. I don't know how true that is, but you can't tell me people don't hope in an aircraft. Consider this. Fuel, starvation, fuel exhaustion, in particular, fuel exhaustion statistics indicate, and this will knock your wheel pants off, 50% of the people that lost their engine because of fuel exhaustion, in other words, they ran out of gas, did so 50% within 1 mile of the destination airport, based on an aviation safety study of NTSB statistics. 50% within 1 mile, 76% of the people that lost their engine because of fuel exhaustion did so within 10 miles of the destination airport. And when the engine quit because of fuel exhaustion, 88%, according to these statistics, 88% of the people were still trying to make the destination airport. Now, what do you suppose they were doing as they were flying? Hoping, exactly. And what they would do is they'd see that little fuel gauge going to E, and then they'd say to themselves, gee, I wonder if that means enough. And then they would actually get a little closer to the side to let parallax make the gauge actually read more. Unbelievable, the things we do. And this is the 2,000-year-old psychology I'm talking about. But, folks, The real power in being able to fly an airplane safely is to use this defensive quality that allows us, again, thinking defensively in an aircraft. It's extremely important. When we fly an aircraft, many of us use this concept of fight or flight. We get in an airplane, we say, I don't care if there is thunderstorms out there, we're going to go flying anyway. We have a Cessna 150 here. It's a turbo model. This thing's got a lot of power. Been up to 5,000 feet with it one time, so they get in this thing, and it all does about a good 75 knots downwind with the tailwind. And they'll get up there, and they'll think to themselves, I will handle any problem if it occurs. Well, folks, that's fight or flight. That's not using defense mentality, if you will. The defense mentality, and this is very important that you get this, is such that people with this defensive capability, this defense mentality, think not of handling the problem when it occurs. They think about handling the problem before it actually occurs, and that's extremely important to consider. That's how they think, and that's how I want you to think. I have a lady friend who thinks very defensively. She has, in essence, made her life very comfortable for her because she thinks defensively. She's taken martial arts training. She's taken all different types of training. Her house has 6 deadbolts on it. 6, no, I'm not kidding, 6 deadbolts. And by the way, to show you how smart she is, she only locks 3 at any one time. That's right. This is very smart because she figures if a burglar is breaking in and they're unlocking 3, they're probably locking the other 3. She's a very smart lady. Take some time on this one. Very, very defensive. She thinks defensively, and that's how. And students, well, we have psychological defense mechanisms too. I just want to show you how important defensive thinking is in an airplane, and I'm going to prove to you we do not do defensive thinking in an aircraft. Students on a cross-country flight use psychological defense mechanisms when they get lost, because as a student, when you get lost, you're really not lost. You just sort of change where it is you wanted to go. That's what we do. Flight instructors think very defensively. I remember sitting, and I'm an active flight instructor, fly about 15 hours a week with different students. It's so much fun, and it really keeps your survival edge honed, if you understand what I'm saying. Not out of necessity, but more out of need in this case. We're sitting there, and I'm always thinking defensively. I'm always thinking, how can I handle the problem before it occurs in the aircraft? That's, again, what gave Chuck Yeager his survival edge in the aircraft based on what I've analyzed of what the man has done. This is most fascinating. In the aircraft, brand new student, actually not brand new, he's got about 2 hours of flight time, and I said, okay, now, Bobby, no matter what happens in the aircraft, you repeat exactly what I say to you. Because most students, of course, when they talk to the controller, they get a little nervous. Most students, most airline transport pilots, and most airline pilots do that too. And he says, okay. So I say, okay, push that little button and say, okay, just ready to push it, okay, and I say, now, tell the tower we want to take off. Say, this is 32 Bravo, ready for taking off. He pushes the button, and the guy goes, this is 32 Bravo, ready to take off. Click, and I said, fantastic. Tower comes on and says, well, there's going to be about a 4-minute delay, 32 Bravo. Today at Long Beach Airport, we're kind of busy. And I look away, and I say this. I go, oh, for Pete's sakes, what's the reason for the delay? And I look over. He had pushed down the button as I said that. Then he looks at me and goes, and I go, did you push that? And he goes, like that? And all of a sudden the tower comes on and says, what? You know, folks, when you say these kind of things at the airport, no matter how defensive you may be sometimes it can get the best of you. At the airport, if you say something like that, well, I mean, we had a great flight after we got out of the penalty box. But these are the kind of things that get tower controllers to say, Roger, 747, taxi to runway 27 position and hold, and you, 32 Bravo, taxi into position on runway 9. And gentlemen, you're clear for takeoff. Y'all be careful now. Have a real good flight, okay? The thing is, you have to think defensively in an aircraft. Defensive thinking is different from fight or flight, and I will show you some things that will knock your socks off as to what people have done to think defensively. Folks, if you were to be a martial artist, you would learn to do 3 things. You would learn to protect, in martial arts, vital areas. Number 2, you would learn to protect and conserve your energy. And number 3, you would learn to nullify the attack. That's what a martial artist does. Protect the vital areas, nullify the attack, and conserve the energy. In essence, martial arts becomes the art and the science of defending yourself. And if you can defend yourself in the spirit of Sun Tzu, who wrote a book many years ago that I think is an excellent book for pilots to read. It's called The Art of War. And Sun Tzu said, invincibility lies in the defense. Invincibility lies in the defense. And thereby we can protect ourselves if we think defensively. And folks, martial arts is real good to have, especially if you go to some of the busy airports around here. Because one time I was at Kennedy and I had to talk to a Hare Krishna because I didn't have enough money to buy a magazine. And Hare Krishnas, you know what I'm talking about. These are the people that wear orange robes, cut their head except for a little strand of hair going out the top, and take a vow of celibacy as if they had a choice. Defense. Consider this. In aviation, 80% of everything you learned as a private pilot was designed to protect you. And we get away from that. Consider this. 80% of every single thing you learned as a private pilot was designed to keep you safe in the air. Good example of that. Your flight instructor would take you up in an airplane, and as you were flying, he'd reach over and he'd pull that throttle back. He was giving you an opportunity to protect yourself by simulating an engine failure, and then you'd have to find a place to land. And some of you were really smart students. He'd pull that throttle back, and you'd say, what'd you do that for? And he says, well, your engine just quit. And you went, look, it's running again. Don't you touch that anymore either. That's defense practice. I was flying with an instrument student one time. I couldn't make this up if I wanted to. He's got the hood on, doing a great scan and everything, like we're going to talk about tomorrow night. He's doing a good scan, and all of a sudden I pulled the throttle back. I said, okay, Vic, your engine just quit. Okay, what are you going to do? And he goes, he lifts his hood up, and he looks outside. He says, oh, I'm going to land right there. I said, Vic, this is supposed to simulate being in the clouds. What'd you do? I said, oh, I just simulated clearing up. Bring back down there. Believe this guy. Folks, consider in an airplane. A defensive pilot thinks like this, and I want to give you a new way of looking at this. Your defense, somewhat similar to the martial artist's defense, is to protect three things. One, you always conserve airspeed all the time. You preserve airspeed. You want to have enough of that molecular stuff blowing over the wings so the big L stays on top and the big H stays underneath, right? You also preserve altitude because it's the reason why in an airplane when you climb out of an airport, you do not climb out at cruise climb out of most airports. You climb out at what? Stan, what do you climb out at? Yeah, excellent, Stan, excellent. That's exactly correct. How about a big hand for Stan for getting that question right up here? You climb out at best angle of climb speed. The reason for that is to get enough altitude so as to have an option for returning your airplane back to the airport or finding another place to land. Altitude is one of the most important, one of the three things that you need to do when you fly an aircraft. Protect the airspeed, protect the altitude. You also protect, in this case, the aircraft structure. And that's why when you fly an airplane, if there's any problem with the aircraft, as I'll talk about in a bit, you assay the problem. You test it using a four-step internal dialogue that I will give you. It's an excellent way to find out what's going on in your aircraft. But you protect the air in turbulence. In turbulence, you reach over and you have an automatic reflex. In any kind of turbulence, boom, the aircraft is hit in turbulence. Boom, threw up right and threw up left and turned up to the left and to the right and to the left. And you reach over, grab that throttle. That's the first thing you do and bring that power back to a speed that will allow you to fly the aircraft at or below what? Maneuvering speed, exactly. And then the second thing you do in this turbulence is you look back and you instruct all the passengers to take the barf bag and actually strap it onto their thing. Because the turbulence normally doesn't stop when you first get into it, and that's what you do. You protect yourself. It's defense. Folks, there's not a one of you in here that has not acquired this defense reflex. In an airplane, when it stalls, what's the first thing you do? Nose down, exactly. First, you hear that stall horn, you go, ooh, and you shove that nose down. If somebody in the back of the aircraft makes a sound like the stall horn, you shove the nose down. And that's a very important reflex. What I'm saying is this. After the private pilot license, 80% of the things that we learned are defense-oriented. After the private license, we stop thinking defensively. We stop thinking about protecting ourselves, defending ourselves in the airplane, and 80% of the things that we learned as private pilots were the things that keep us safe. And that's the whole point I'm trying to make. I remember being out at the airport one time, had a young lady, I was a 19-year-old flight instructor. A young lady came out, she was 26 years old, and we were going to go up and practice stalls. And I knew that when you practice stalls, sometimes the maneuver can be relatively, aggressive, so to speak, if you lower the nose, and sometimes students have a tendency to lower the nose a tad too much. So what happened was she brought her little baby out with her. Now, the baby's only about a year old, and of course, I'm a 19-year-old flight instructor, learning how to assert myself in command of my ship, my Cessna 150. And the lady came out, and I said, Barbara, you can't take that baby with us. And she said, well, why not? I said, because babies should not fly in aircraft. And she said, well, that's not a good reason. You better give me a good reason. Why can't I take this baby with me? And I said, Barbara, I am the professional flight instructor on this aircraft. I am almost have enough time to be chief pilot at the FBO. I am in charge of this aircraft. 91.3 says I am in command, and what I say goes, and I say that baby's not going, and that's it. Poof, no more. I will not take no for an answer in this case. No baby. That's fine. So, we're climbing out, and I'm holding this baby. Rule number one, never argue with a lady who's got a baby. But we take this little thing out and we're flying around, and I never realized it, but if you have a dirty airplane, and you take this baby and you put it on the carpet, it will graze for a while. It's the most amazing. Your airplane gets clean, but we were out there doing stalls, and I didn't think about it. She forgot about the baby, and I'm flying, and we're doing these stalls, and all of a sudden, you remember the Cessna 150s with the rear view mirrors? Remember those? Now I realize what they're for. To check for floating objects in the back of the aircraft. So we go into this one stall, she shoves down a little briskly, I look in the rearview mirror, and here comes this baby face coming up in the mirror. Most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But it was great, though. I don't know, I had this baby, and she made me feed this baby. You have to feed the baby, of course, otherwise it sounds like a stall horn as you're flying most of the time. I've got this little thing, and I'm feeding it like that. And I'll tell you why, I learned something very interesting. You can feed a baby twice as fast when you do a 60-degree bank in the airplane. Most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But this is what we call the survival reflex, folks, and this is extremely important. Number one, and this is an extremely important thing, in an aircraft what we must do, and this is the first rule of attaining this survival orientation, and the very first rule is this. In an aircraft, we always must first acknowledge our own vulnerability. Folks, this applies to an automobile, a car, a train, a skateboard, a bicycle, any, for that matter, a pair of shoes, any moving vehicle whatsoever. Before we get in that vehicle, what seems to typify those people with this survival orientation is they acknowledge the fact that they are vulnerable. Now, that seems trite and seems contrary, but I must tell you that Sigmund Freud said, man is the only creature that acts as if he or she will live forever.